Hello, and welcome back to the Cultural Curriculum Chat podcast, the show where we explore culture, identity, education, and global perspectives that help us become more thoughtful and inclusive human beings. I'm your host, Jebeh Edmunds, educator, cultural consultant, and the creator behind cultural curriculum resources for educators and organizations. Today's conversation is powerful and deeply important. We're joined today by Zolal Habibi, an Iranian human rights activist who spent over 25 years advocating for political prisoners, women, and freedom seekers inside Iran. Her work shines a light on the courage of people who continue to fight for justice, equality, and human dignity in extremely difficult circumstances. We're going to talk about topics of human rights activism, why global awareness matters, the resilience of Iranian women and political prisoners, and what the world needs to understand about the fight for freedom. Zalal, welcome to the show. It's such an honor to have you here with us today.
It's a pleasure to be with you. Thank you for the opportunity, and please allow me to greet those who are tuning in to the podcast today. It's a pleasure to be able to be here and speak with you.
Oh, thank you, my dear. You have spent over 25 years advocating for human rights and political prisoners. Can you share what first inspired you to dedicate your life to this work?
Well, I think human rights in Iran has been intertwined with my life from the onset. I got introduced to the human rights situation in Iran very early on because my father was a writer and a human rights activist, and so Um, I became acquainted with the situation from, a very, very young age. Probably what I can remember myself is like when I was 4 or 5, and meeting people who were like victims of torture or who had escaped prison and whatnot. So, um, and from when I hear from others, I mean, the first time I went to a demonstration was when I was 3 days old. So, I mean, the whole process has been, um, uh, it has always been part and parcel of my life. But the turning point for me was in the summer of 1999 when the student uprising broke out in Iran. And at that point, there had been practically complete silence in Iran society for about 11 years since the 1988 massacre had taken place. And it was people from our generation who were coming to the scene, who were taking, this step forward to try to change the situation in Iran. And um, I remember it was also the first time that we were actually seeing the things live because it was the start of cable television and whatnot. And so it was being reported. And I remember seeing those things, like the scenes of, university students being thrown over, you know, buildings and whatnot. And I kept thinking to myself, am I just going to be a bystander and watch and just, um, or am I going to be one of those who helps create that change? So people can finally live in freedom and in peace and in sort of democracy in Iran. And so that was the turning point for me. I had just graduated from high school and I was on my way to go and study medicine. But I decided to join the resistance instead because I had been into an article actually the summer before, and in it said there were at that time about 20,000 Iranian doctors or Iranian American doctors in the US. And I thought to myself, are you going to be one of those 20,000? Or are you going to be one of those who freed Iran so these 20,000 could actually go and serve their own people? And so that was like the turning point for me. Um, yeah.
It's just how brave and courageous. And I love how you said that, like, yes, I want to go into medicine, but I also want to get that resistance so those 20,000 can serve their own people, back home. Oh, that is so powerful. So, for listeners who may not be familiar, can you help us understand the current human rights situation in Iran and what we should know?
Well, the reality is that unfortunately for the last 47 years, Iran has been uh, ruled by a brutal dictatorship. 120,000, over 120,000 people have been executed just for their political views and beliefs. And this has been continuous. Just in 2025, over 2,200 people were executed in Iran. And just right now, in the past, you know, in the matter of like 2 months or so, over 600 people have been executed in Iran. This is aside from those who were killed on the street. This is aside from the thousands who were killed in the uprising in January in Iran. And so Iran is the number one country in executions per capita, unfortunately. And this has been the case continuously, not unfortunately, not only in the past 4 or 5 decades that this regime has been ruling, but also before that. I actually ran into a report from Amnesty International from 1976, and it said at that time Iran was the number one country in execution. And unfortunately, today Iran is the number one country in executions. And so, unfortunately, the people of Iran have been fighting against, brutal dictatorships, be it, as people say in Iran, turbans or crown. But, they've been in this fight for freedom. And so right now it has reached a point where there isn't a single area or a single subject that you could put your finger on in Iran that hasn't been completely destroyed by the regime. From the environment, from, the economy, from every aspect of social life that you look at, it's a disaster. And so the people around really want to be able to move forward and to, you know, have this regime overthrown in its entirety. This regime has shown over the decades that it's not reformable. As we say, a viper never gives birth to a dove. And that has been proven. And this is something that our movement has been saying for actually over 3 decades now. We first said that a viper never gives birth to a dove when Khatami was brought into power, and that was in 1996. Today we're in 2020. And so I think that what is very interesting for me is the things that, issues and principles and that, that we have stated over the years. One by one, the world is seeing that, it was true. Unfortunately, it was not listened to in time. And so that is why we are in the place that we are. I think the reality is that after the uprising in January, which started December 28th, 2025, the world, I think, saw the resolve in the Iranian people that they want to be able to see that change. And they understand that no one's going to hand you freedom in silver platter, and they're willing to pay that price themselves. The people of Iran, what was very interesting was, these youth who were taking part in the protest, a lot of them, they said their final farewell before going to the a lot of them, did like video clips or audio files or whatever. They left it for their families just in case they never returned. So their families have that final message. And so they understood the risk, but they still came to the street because they have experienced this in the last, for decades. They're seeing the country that, change is not going to come about if we each are trying to just protect ourselves. We need to
Yes,
think
yeah.
we need to think of our history. We need to think of the future and to be able to make that sacrifice. And, as I said, 120,000 people have made that sacrifice in Iran, but the fight still continues. And I think that today the Gen Z of Iran has made that decision that, we can't continue this cycle anymore. In the last
Yeah.
10 years, in the last decade, we have had 4 major uprisings in Iran. And each time we see it evolve, step by step. But each time it is also met with brutal force. And unfortunately, the regime, has hundreds or thousands of people killed on the street. And that way it is able to create like this wave of suppression to be able to keep people in their homes and to buy time for itself until the next spark. Because the regime knows it's like a powder keg. Um, People just need that spark to be able to stand against the regime. And so it is trying to do all it can to extend its lifeline. But unfortunately, it has come at a great price for the people of Iran. And the reality is that today, it's not only the regime that has led us to where we are today, it's also been, the policy toward the Iranian regime over the years. I mean, there's been a policy of appeasement toward this regime for over 4 decades now. And unfortunately, the people who have been used as the bargaining chip at the table are the Iranian people and the resistance specifically. And so, you know, uh, it has come with a great price, but unfortunately, we know from history, I mean, even look at World War II, um, payment leads to a war. And this is something that we've been trying to warn about for 2 decades, over, I think it's 22 years now, over 21 years ago. I think it was in December 2005, Mrs. Rajavi spoke at the European Parliament. She is the president-elect of the Iranian resistance for the interim government after the fall of the regime. She stated there that the solution is neither war nor appeasement. But if you don't stop the process of appeasement, it will lead to a war. And she stated there's a third option. And that third option is supporting the people of Iran and their organized resistance to bring about change. Because you also have to understand like the history of Iran. Iran is not Iraq or Afghanistan or Libya or any other country, Syria or whatnot. Iran had the history. If you look in the last century, we have had 3 dictators, and each one has been installed in our country.
Yes.
And,
Yes.
and
Yes.
so
For teachers. Yeah.
have the experience of, and that's not a road that we want to go down again. So Reza Khan, he was brought in by the British once he wasn't serving their purposes anymore. He was taken into exile, and his son was brought in, Mohammad Reza Shah, and he wasn't very strong at the beginning of it. And since his father had been removed, he knew that he had to be, in line. The people of Iran had the 1906 constitutional revolution, so they were trying to use that, I guess, time to be able to create that at least constitutional, monarchy to be able to have some kind of checks and balances or freedom.
Yes.
And so the parliament elected Dr. Mossadegh as the prime minister, and that only lasted for 2 years because Dr. Mossadegh, he nationalized Iran's oil, which was something that the West did not want, and so there was a coup d'état carried out against him by the CIA and MI6, and unfortunately, the only democratic government that Iran has had in the last century was, taken out through that coup d'état, and Mohammad Reza Pahlavi was reinstated. And after that, he ruled with the iron fist, with the Sabah, which is known for how notorious it was in torture and executions and whatnot, suppression. And he had a one-party rule, and he said, well, we only have the Rajavi's party. If you don't like it, either leave the country or you're going to be arrested. And that was how he ruled. And so that eventually led to the 1979 revolution, which the people of Iran revolted against, the dictatorship, and they were able to put an end to monarchy in Iran. But unfortunately, their revolution was hijacked. Why? Because it was the Cold War era.
Yes.
At the time, first of all, the Shah had cracked down on all of the progressive movements in Iran. So their leaders were all in prison or had been executed, but they were the ones that actually created this revolution. And then the group that had open hands in Iran were the mullahs, because the Shah needed their dahi to justify
Keep moving. His rule,
because
yeah.
number of mosques in Iran had gone from 500 to 5,000 during Muhammad Reza Pahlavi's time. So in 37 years that he ruled, I think. So that was, that network was intact. On the other hand, Khomeini was taken, he was in exile in Iraq at the time, in Najaf. He was brought to Paris, and he was in Paris for about 6 months. And there were negotiations held with him, and he made, a whole bunch of empty promises to the international community, or to the Western countries more. And they figured, well, he's a mullah. He has fundamentalist views, but at the end of the day, he's probably not going to become an ally of the USSR, while the progressive movements, they're against, foreign intervention in their country, and the fact that imperialism, everything it has had. So they figured it's the safer bet to go with communism. And the people of Iran have been suffering from that for 47 years now. So today, the people of Iran want to take their destiny into their own hands. They say, look, we have the capability and the potential to bring about that change. Just allow us to do that. Unfortunately, due to the positive people, that has not been possible. Any form of resistance has been labeled as terrorism and whatnot, because that was what the regime asked, the Western governments to do. And they did, unfortunately, some for economic ties, some because of Iran's threat, because Iran is unfortunately the number one state sponsor of international terrorism. But unfortunately, this has had a great toll on the people of Iran. And today, unfortunately, we are in the situation that we are. But as I said, Rajavi has said from over 20 years ago, there's a third option. We're not stuck just between the two. The third option is supporting the people of Iran and their organized resistance to bring about change.
Yes.
We're not asking for troops on the ground. We're not asking for any of that. We're just asking you to recognize the people's rights to resist and fight back against that. You just hold the regime accountable. Stop giving the aid for it to continue. I mean, right now, the reality is that the regime uses, the highest technology for suppression. Where are they getting its somebody from?
That
So you're getting
part.
support from the Western, government. So that is something that could have been prevented. Um, right now, a lot of people are also asking today, as we are speaking. I hope that by the time this is aired, the war is over.
Yes,
But today,
same.
of the war.
Oh,
And
day 18, yeah.
and it is. I mean, you can imagine. I mean, war has consequences. It's a catastrophe when it comes to the infrastructure that has been destroyed, civilian lives that
Yes.
have been taken and whatnot. And so, again, I we're not. I mean, in general speaking, we've always said, if you understand Iran, you understand that certain scenarios just don't work in Iran. Like, for instance, scenario like Venezuela. It doesn't work anymore. Why? Because even if you take out Khomeini, the apparatus is still intact. That system is still
Yes.
there.
The system is still there. Yeah.
I mean, classical dictatorship, that is with the one man rule. Yes, he was the supreme leader, but he had like a whole infrastructure, a whole system intact. And that is what we're seeing. I mean, today, day 18 is the death of Khomeini, but the regime is still operating. Um, on the other hand, Iran is about 3 times the size of Iraq and 4 times the population. The terrain in Iran is very different. We have mountains, we have the desert, we have, forests, the sea and everything. But we also have like very, I mean, especially when you look at Tehran, which is the capital in that area, very populated cities. So,
Yes.
the scenario of troops on the ground just doesn't work. Like, where are you
Right.
going to get these troops on the ground? And so that's not a likely scenario.
Viable and yeah.
Not from foreign intervention in Iran. And at the end of the day, democracy is never installed in a country. It has to come from the people, and they have to be forced to change. The reality is that after the uprising in January, the regime had, I mean, with the massacre that it created, after that, they had like martial law throughout Iran to make sure that people don't come to the streets again. Um, but people turned every opportunity to voice their dissent and to continue their resistance. We saw there were ceremonies being held for the memorial services that they were holding for those who had been killed. In Iranian culture, we have this thing that on the 40th day of someone's passing, they hold like a memorial service, and
Yeah.
that was actually like the week of the final week of February was that 40th of a lot of
Yeah.
people who had. So we were seeing those ceremonies throughout Iran, and even though the families were in pain, but they weren't, you know, mourning, or they weren't dwelling in their sorrows. I guess they could say they are mourning, but they weren't showing it. They were actually turning those ceremonies to memorial services where they were honoring their children. They were celebrating the lives of their loved ones, and they were making pledge with them to continue the fight. That we're
Keep
not
going.
lives to be lost in vain. We're going to
Yes.
continue till the overthrow of the regime. And so that really scared the regime because they were standing in those sites and trying to control people, but the fact that people were still standing in defiance, even though you were armed and they're just with bare hands, that's a great deal.
Yes.
That actually on February 22nd, um, after about 50 days, universities in Iran resumed because during this whole time it was online to make sure that they can so no one is in campus because they had actually shut down the campuses because they understood that the students were one of the strongholds of the uprising.
The goal. Yeah.
Once classes resumed on campus, on site, that first day, protests started in universities across Iran. And it continued for, till Thursday that week. And that's when the regime was like, you know what? All classes will be online till the end of the Persian New Year, which is because this Friday, March 20th, is the spring equinox, and that's Persian New Year. And then there's a 2-week, uh, um, I guess, spring break type thing.
Yeah.
Afterwards, it'll be in mid-April when schools resume.
Resume.
So then we're not going to have anyone on campuses anymore because they're afraid of the reaction. And what was really interesting though is that about 5 days before the start of the war, so on February 23rd, simultaneous with the protests of the students, resistance units in Iran carried out a operation against the headquarters of Khamenei. This was armed resistance. About a group of 250 members of the resistance unit carried out operation against targeting Khamenei headquarters specifically. And that had a message both for the regime and for the people of Iran. So just to give you some background, the resistance units are a strategy that the Iranian resistance has set forth for over a decade now. They believe that it's really important to have people, organized networks inside of Iran on the ground, underground. But there's, small groups of people. Some are like 2, 3, some are up to 20 in one units, but they're local. They know their city, they know their neighborhood, they know everyone. So they have a different understanding of, everything, and they can, act when it's needed. And what they have been doing in the past few years is, first of all, they're the ones who have kept the flame of resistance, alive in Iran.
Yes.
And they have been a source of hope because with their activities, like for instance, in 1 year they carried out like 39,000 activities in 1 year. So just imagine, at a time that the regime is trying to spread so much, fear in society, but everywhere you go, you run into like, I don't know, a slogan, a poster, something that tells you, you know,
Point.
continue. It's it raises awareness, it gives people hope, and it also shows them, how you're supposed to resist in face of this.
Yes.
And I think that that's really important. And what was very interesting is the fact that we saw it grow, practically double annually. And like for instance, the same year that they carried out 39,000 activities, they also targeted about 3,000 centers of oppression. So that that is why everyone said, like, this time around in the uprising, one of the things that everyone touched on was, first of all, you could see hope and people died. The
Yes.
second is that you saw people, they felt like people are like, we felt like we knew what we were supposed to do when we came to the street. And that is, unconsciously, when you see all of these activities throughout the year and continuously, it just, when that, urgency comes up, you have that, in the
Yes.
back of your mind,
Back of
so
your
that,
mind.
really helps. And also that the people who were on the offensive, a lot of people touched on the fact that you could see elements of organizational structure in the protest this time around. People were protecting one another, and people were helping up. They were disarming the suppressive forces and, protecting the people. So I think all of that was the role of, the resistance unit. And I think that that really put us in a different um,
Yeah.
phase.
In a
But
phase. Yeah.
that this operation had was, first of all, the resistance continues. Secondly, this is the new norm that we're going to be seeing. Operations
Yes.
being carried out, targeting specific locations. They're not targeting civilians. They're not targeting just, general areas. It's, targeted of specific areas. And on the other hand, the message that it had was, the regime is in a much weaker state than it tries to present itself because, the regime tried to say they're very strong, but this was the most secure location in all of Iran. And at a time that they were on heightened security because they feared that a war would break out any day now. And despite that, they were able to carry out the operation. So that really, I think, had a message for people inside of Iran and gave them a lot of hope that despite all of this suppression, we are going to, stand again and we're going to continue. But also, I think that for the regime, it was a sign that, even with all the killings and everything, we were not able to um, suppress the uprising.
Suppress. Yeah. And like you said, you have to be strategic in that resistance, to pinpoint the exact groups of people in that system to make it fall. Wow. Wow. I've learned so much, Zalal. And I like how you even talked about because that perspective of Iran, in the 70s and everything was good, but I love how you shared with your lived experience and the article saying that there were still mass executions even at that time. And like you said, the crown versus the turban, like there was still a lot of human suppression going on, and that in our Western media thinking, oh, well, it just happened when Al Khamenei came into power. But that is not the case. So thank you for opening my eyes to learning that as well. Because there is that Western media of saying, oh, it only happened, 47 years ago. But you're saying, no, decades, centuries before that, there was still a stronghold, with those dictatorships, just different crown or the turban or, yeah, different groups coming in. Let's talk about the women because you know as well as I do, women have always been the center of resistance. They've been the matrilineal line to say, no, we need to have a collective. We can't just do this as an individual. We need to move. What role are women playing right now in that resistance today, like you were saying?
Well, this is a very interesting part of the history of our resistance because we believe that women are the force for change. So that is something that we take pride in, and it is something that you can see throughout the ranks of this movement. Um, since 1980s, actually, the Iranian resistance, they used to do like an annual analysis of, what is going on, where do we stand, everything. And they realized that, women are paying a great price to be active in resistance because the norms of society, I mean, I think more people are like willing to have their sons being active in a resistance than their daughters. I mean, just like the norms of society. And, but on the other hand, we are up against a misogynist regime that targets women much more severely. And the fact that when they see women like defying them, it just makes them like, you know, it creates hysteria for them. And so they're more, suppressive and also more brutal when it comes to women. So women in prisons were facing much more torture, like in method and severity of it. And they were still the ones who were showing the most resistance in prison and even in executions. I mean, in Iran, over 30,000 women have been executed, for political dissent. Um, but they weren't being represented in the highest ranks of the movement. And so the minute the movement realized that, and a progressive, movement, they're like, we can't have that. And so they just changed the entire system of our movement. And so Mrs. Rajavi has actually led this change for 41 years, soon actually 41 years. And she has, what was important was she was made, she was chosen to be the co-leader of the movement, but she didn't stop there because she's like, I'm not an exception to the rule. This is systematic. Women in this movement, they have so much potential to be so much more. Especially it's like a spring. The more pressure you put on a spring, when you take that pressure off, the more potential it has to jump. And, she has taken one by one the hands of like women, generation after generation, and has created like a whole, you know, line of capable female leaders in all fields, in all arenas. And this has been continuous for, as I said, like seriously, in the past 3 decades, but for 4 decades now. And the reality is, like, for instance, the NDK, which are the main Iranian opposition group, the entire leadership council of the NDK have been women since 1993 till today. All the secretary generals of this movement have been women since 1989 till today. And so that is in the ranks of the NEK. In the National Council of Resistance of Iran, about 52% of the National Council of Resistance of Iran are women. National Council of Resistance of Iran served as a parliament in exile with about 500 members. And as I said, 52% are women. And many of the chairs of the 52 of the 25 committees that the NCRI have are women. And the president-elect of the NCRI for the interim government after the fall of this regime is a woman. And so that stands 180 degrees opposed to the misogynist regime that's ruling Iran. And we, um, to be honest, as someone who grew up seeing that, I mean, in 1993, when the leadership council was announced that it's formed of all women, I was 12. And that was the reality that I grew up with, that women are capable to do anything and everything in all realms. It's not even like only this sector or that. From 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 in politics to social issues to military. It doesn't make a difference. Women are those who can lead, and so I grew up. I realized at one point when I was in high school that I don't have a lot of the glass ceilings that girls in my, my friends or around me have, because I grew up with this reality and they were faced with a different reality. And so I remember back in 1996 when it was the Beijing conference, women's conference. Um, uh, the motto that year, after the speech by Hillary Clinton, she was first lady at the time, is that, women's rights are human rights and human rights are women's rights. And that was supposed to be, you know, very progressive view and like pioneering idea. And I remember back then hearing it and I was like, that's it. I mean, you know, that's freaking given. Why are we even discussing it? I didn't understand that, 30 years later, the world had yet to
To
reach that.
have that.
And
Yes.
at that point, I was growing up with this reality that women are in leadership and women are the force for change. And, you know, um, that was what I grew up seeing. And I had such great role models in front of me that they taught me that, you have so much potential to strive and become, accomplish anything. What's important is just making that decision and paying the price for that decision step by step. And it's not something that happens overnight. It's not going to be something, it's step by step. You have to pay that price, but you will be able to reach that. And I think that in fact had a great effect in Iran, despite the censorship, despite the fact of, despite all of the disinformation and misinformation and propaganda campaigns that the regime has launched for decades against this movement. But even through, I guess, those, every means, I mean, even through the craft everywhere, this message was being beamed into Iran that, women have this potential and knew the women of Iran are the force who's going to overthrow this regime. This is something that Maryam said back in 1996 in a speech in London. And towards culmination, she said, you are going to be overthrown by the same force that you take for granted because you can't even see them, but that is the brave woman of Iran. And I think in 2022, the world saw a glimpse of that after the uprisings that broke out after the death of Mahsa Jina Amini in Iran. And a lot of people were taken by storm. And like, oh my God, look at the bravery of the Iranian woman. But for us, it wasn't something new because we're like,
You've been
that's
doing
how
that.
this movement.
It's always
And
been,
I think
yeah.
that that is also something that we are continuing to see because we truly do believe that women are that force for change and they are the ones who will be um, craving that change. And I think that, it's really, I think this is one of the, I guess, the litmus test for a democracy is where does it stand on the issue of women and equality. I think
Yes.
that, for instance, right now, when the issue of Iran is being put on the table, a lot of people are like, what is the solution? What comes next? Well, I think when I go question, how can we judge the different groups or, alternatives that are being presented and some of them are, just being propped up? Well, where do they stand on the issue of women? How
Mhm.
do they still believe in like a hereditary system? I mean, that speaks volumes for itself. Or do they
Yes.
specifically believe in, equality and actually um, to have equity to be able to reach that equality finally? And this is something that has been outlined, I think, in the 10-point plan set forth by Mrs. Rajavi. It calls for gender equality and, the presence of women in leadership in Iran. Um, there is the NCRI has a 12-point plan for the rights of women in the future of Iran. And this is something that I think what's really important for people of Iran is the fact that this isn't just words or in writing, because there are a lot of people who have, wishing political campaigns, right, for elections. They make a lot of and then they do something else. But that's something that people have been seeing in the making on the ground for 3 decades. So that is something that they can put their trust in, because it's not like I know that especially like the younger generation of like the supporters of the resistance, they have seen nothing but this. And so they're like, has it always been like that? And I'm like, no, I haven't always been like this. But to them, that's the reality that they grew up with. And so I think that that's really important, and that's the ground. Um, the Just to explain a bit, there's a 10-point plan that Mr. Rajavi has set forth for the transition period in Iran, and that actually served like as a guideline for like what will come and what we need to watch out for. I guess many lawmakers have supported it. The majority of the U.S. Congress have supported this 10-point plan for many years now, but over 4,000 lawmakers around the world, over 130 former heads of states, over 100 Nobel laureates have endorsed and supported this 10-point plan. Many have called it Jeffersonian because it covers like those basics and makes sure, like, even though it's covering the basics, it also presents like a very bright future. It calls for, separation of religion and state. It calls for gender equality. That, the final criterion is ballot bomb. It calls for independent judiciary. It calls for for all of these suppressive organs from the IRGC to the MOIS and all of it to be disbanded. It also calls for the abolition of the death penalty and all forms of torture in Iran. It calls for a non-nuclear Iran that will be in peace with the region, which is hopefully a force of, stability instead of destabilizing force in the region. It calls for, recognizing the rights of Iran's ethnicity, the autonomy of Kurdistan, whatnot. And so I think that the free market economy, all of it, when you look at it, it's a very, even though it's 10 points, but it's very complete.
Nuance and yes, yeah.
So we hope that will be able to allow us to move in the 21st century to a secular democratic republic in Iran. That is like the message from people inside Iran. They're like, you know what? We're not the same way that we said there's a third option when it comes to it's neither war nor peace. When there's a third option, there's also a third option. And we're not stuck between the current regime or the former dictatorship.
Yeah.
We want to move forward in the 21st century to a secular democratic republic. We don't have to choose between being ruled over by, something, a supreme leader or a king or whatnot. We want to be able to have that freedom and have that democracy and have like people's sovereignty. And that is what the people of Iran are yearning for. They're like, we're not sacrificing our lives to have,
To
some people
status
come
what it was.
just this the time and era for that are well over. And, we haven't made this much sacrifice to just replace one dictator with another.
Yes.
So we're not in the business of recycling dictators right now in Iran. It's something that unfortunately there are, I guess, interest groups or those who are promoting that, which is something that Iran is really don't want.
Wow. And you're right, for the people, by the people, right? That whole democratic system and republic. And I'm so hopeful that it will come to fruition, for all of you and your people back home. Oh, Zalal, I have learned so much in this interview. I am humbled and honored for you to share and be vulnerable with us today because this is a real reality that you've shared with us, but also your life's work of speaking up and resisting of something that's been a system that's been so oppressive and suppressive and dehumanizing. So I thank you for that. Where can our listeners, viewers, find your work?
Well, or if you would like to learn more about the National Council of the Victims of Iran, you can visit ncr-iran.org. to learn more about Maryam Rajavi, which I think a lot of your viewers would be interested in, they can visit maryamrajaviforchange.com or maryam-rajavi.com. Um, and to on social media, I mean, if you want to find me, I am available on X, Instagram, and LinkedIn. So search my name and it should come up. Um, but yeah, please feel free to reach out if you want to become active in the yeah, because right now is the situation that we could use every help, right? So if you're based in the US, you can reach out to Organization of Iranian American Communities. It's OIAC.org. They have chapters in over 40 different states. So you should probably be covered. And they they will put you in contact with the local chapter. And we do a lot of work there, both on the ground in different cities and, holding exhibits, info booths, um, protests, rallies, whatnot, but also a lot of work is being done um, on Capitol Hill and also in the media. So feel free to reach out to them. Um, and if you are in any other country, be it Canada, Australia, Europe, wherever, you can reach out to iranfreedom.org and they will put you in contact with local chapters.
That's awesome. And we'll have all of those links and where our listeners and viewers can find your important work, Zalal, in the show notes as well. Oh, thank you so, so much. And oh my gosh, I've learned so much. I could talk to you all day just by just taking in your knowledge and just thank you. You give us hope, going in and doing the work for all of your people and just knowing you're not alone. And this is amazing for educators as well, Zalal, to show that there are multiple organizations and correct firsthand accounts that teachers can use to, in their lesson plans with current events, especially what's going on right now. Anything else you'd like to add?
But yeah, I think teachers can play a major role because you are what's forming the future. So I think that education is really important and raising awareness and asking those questions, putting, uh, you know, informing your students, first of all, for them to understand that, a lot of the things that we take for granted in society, it's not only to given. So honor it, treasure it, um, safeguard it, but also just to have, to be able to learn the reality and the real history, because unfortunately we've fed a lot of
It's
alternative
information.
or correct necessarily. So it really helps you put things in perspective once you have the actual fact of, what happened, what was the history there. And it helps us understand even the society that we live in. We shouldn't look at it like this is far away from us, and in different continents or whatnot, or this story belongs to a different century or a different decade. I think that all of it really comes to our aid in understanding like the world that we live in and what our responsibility is and how we can learn from history, because history is what guides us in the future. So
Yes, it sure does. And being a classroom teacher, former classroom teacher, we know if we don't learn it, we repeat it. That's what I used to tell my fifth graders, and that's so true. Oh, Zalal, thank you so much for being on the show today. And if this episode moved you, please share it with a friend, colleague, or educator who values global understanding and cultural awareness. And I'll see you here same time next week. Bye bye.
Love it.